Good morning, everyone. At the end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, there was a lot of competition between the great powers to see who could have the strongest navy, because that was one way you could show that you were in fact a world power. And it was on this date, July 7, 1908, that we sent the Great White Fleet on a worldwide tour. These were modern battleships, all painted white, and it was Teddy Roosevelt's idea, and one of his ways he thought we could project to the rest of the world that we were in fact becoming a world power. During the Revolutionary War, we were able to win at Yorktown because the French Navy had helped us. After independence, we built our own navy. This is one of our more famous ships, old Ironside in Boston Harbor. Maybe some of you have visited it. During the Civil War, the North blockaded the South using those kinds of wooden ships, but the wooden ship era came to an end in 1862 when the Monitor and the Merrimack fought each other outside of Norfolk, Virginia. And it was also clear in the 1800s that the British Empire was held together and kept strong by its navy. So in 1890, Alfred Mahan wrote this book, one of the more important books of naval strategy in modern times. And everybody wanted to have a strong navy after reading this book. And the Pacific became split up by the great powers, partly because people wanted coaling stations for their steam-powered warships. And note, everybody, how Japan is a naval power in the Pacific. Here's our first battleship, hull number 1, the Uss Indiana, built in 1893. But a more famous ship from that time period is this armored cruiser, the Maine, which blew up in Havana Harbor. Here's a picture of that. We blame the Spanish for this. We're pretty sure now, though, it was an internal explosion because of where the coal had been stored relative to the gunpowder. Here's a picture of the wreckage of the Maine in Havana Harbor in Cuba. If you look to the right, you can see one of the masts of the ship. And in Arlington Cemetery today is one of the masts. And in New York City, Central Park, you can also see this memorial to the Maine. So the blowing up of the Maine was a big deal. We end up going to war with Spain. Part of it's in the area of Cuba, and part of it is in the Philippines. And if you see that blue line from Hong Kong to Manila, that's the route Dewey took with the Navy, and he was ordered to do that by the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt had read Mahan's book. He was a huge fan of the Navy. So Dewey steamed to Manila with his modern steel warships, completely destroyed the Spanish fleet of mostly wooden ships. It was a pretty easy win for the American Navy. Dewey becomes a big hero, and you can visit his ship Olympia in Philadelphia. That's where it's in the river today, so that might be worth a trip sometime. So on this date, July 7, 1908, we send the Great White Fleet across the Pacific, partly to make an impression on Japan, because the Japanese were also a naval power in the Pacific. The Panama Canal becomes really important, because if you're going to have a two-ocean navy, you need an easy way to get from one coast to another, and the Panama Canal would help with that. This was Teddy Roosevelt's project. He actually went down to Panama to watch the canal being built. Here you see him in a big steam shovel, and the canal, of course, does get built. For many Americans, this is maybe the most famous battleship, the Arizona, built in 1915, sunk by the Japanese with airplanes from aircraft carriers. This is our aircraft carrier, the Essex, during World War II. This becomes the main warship, really, of World War II, doesn't it? But the battleship is important symbolically. This is in Hawaii, the Arizona in the front. The war began with Pearl Harbor, the Missouri in the back, where the Japanese surrendered to the Americans in Tokyo. So the battleship has about a 40-year period and an important part of the American naval history.